First of all, welcome to Umbraco Users Group of India. And as you know, we are running an Umbraco India community, especially in Meetup for in India. And yeah, it's a Meetup number 7, and we warmly welcome you to host with us today for the headless. So yes, Jordan, just give you about your quick introduction and we can proceed.
Cool, sounds good. Well, I've actually got some slides with an introduction slide on there, so I'll probably just share those straight away.
Yep.
So let me know, is that screen share coming through okay?
It is. We can see it. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. Well, hello everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to come and chat. This is me here. I'm Jordan. So I have been for the past year and a half the head of Heartcore, or the team lead for the Heartcore team here at Umbraco HQ. And prior to starting at Umbraco, I have around about 6 or 7 years worth of experience in the Umbraco ecosystem in general. So before starting at HQ, I was no stranger to Umbraco. So today I've got a few things to talk to you all about. We're going to kind of keep it reasonably simple, and we're going to try and keep it open to all types of people. So I know that this being an Umbraco meetup, there's obviously going to be a few developers in the audience, but we'll try and talk about some of the non-technical side of Heartcore as well, and why you might want to use Heartcore as a non-technical person. And then lastly, we're going to take a little bit of a sneak peek into some of what's coming up for Heartcore and some of the future, and what you might expect from the product some time from now. So let's start with what Heartcore actually is, because when some people think of Heartcore, they just think headless, but it's a lot more than that. So Heartcore is a software as a service, and each of these words in bold, we're going to talk about a little bit more in this presentation. So Heartcore software as a service, first of all, it's a headless content management system, and it's based on Umbraco. So you get the really, really friendly back office content editing experience that comes with Umbraco. All of the normal property editors that you'd expect to be there, everything that you get with kind of Umbraco Cloud or self-hosted Umbraco, all of those kind of property editors and everything are all included in Heartcore. But Heartcore being headless, it also has some very, very flexible APIs. So multiple different kinds of APIs that are highly performant, and they deliver content using a global CDN. And we'll talk a bit more about what all of that means soon. But first of all, let's talk about the first part. So Heartcore is software as a service. Now, why does that matter, you might ask? I mean, a lot of you are going to have used software as a service before, and some of you will know these advantages like the back of your hand. But for anyone in the room who doesn't, let's talk about some of the reasons why you might use software as a service. It's really fast to get started with. So it means a really low time to market. In order to get a Heartcore site started, you can simply go to the Umbraco Cloud portal, you can click the new project button, and within literal minutes, you can be up and running with a new install. There's no need to worry about getting continuous integration up and running. You don't need to worry about setting up your Visual Studio solution or anything like that. So it's really fast to get started. And because of that, it's also a really low upfront cost. You don't have to pay a big chunk of money to someone to host your website up front. You know, you're not paying an annual bill. You're not paying necessarily for any licenses up front or anything to that effect. There's reduced maintenance overhead, or more succinctly put, we do the patching for you so that you don't have to. So in Heartcore, we will automatically roll out upgrades to your CMS, and you don't have to worry about any of that. It's scalable. So in general, we're going to throw a lot more resources at those sites than your clients might otherwise be willing to pay for. And you get some guarantees around like how available the site is, and you get some service level agreements around how much time of the year that site is going to be available. And when you have any issues, for example, you come to our support and there's some SLAs around our support response times for certain tiers of the product as well. And if none of that's convinced you, there's an organization called Better Cloud, and every year they put out a state of software as a service and operations report. And they found in 2022 that workplaces that heavily use software as a service tends to be around 30% more efficient than other types of businesses. So there's big productivity gains that you can get out of software as a service. As software as a service, it comes in several plan tiers. So Heartcore has 4. We're showing 3 of them here. Starter, Standard, Professional. We've also got an enterprise offering that is kind of custom pricing. And actually there's a 5th because we also do free trials as well, but those are only available for a sort of limited time until they get closed down or we ask you to move to another paid plan. So the trials are limited in duration. The rough pricing is here. It varies a little bit by region, so don't be surprised to see those prices change very slightly or by currency that you're paying in. The starter environments are really quick and easy point to get started with a project. What we see a lot of customers do is start with a starter and then upgrade it later on once they start moving to production. But just to get their development started, often customers will start with the starter. And it's sort of a single environment project. It's ideal for small to medium businesses or microsites or just getting started with a project before you upgrade. We've got the standard tier, and that sort of allows you to have multiple environments. It includes an Umbraco Forms license out of the box, and it gives you access to a few more features like the preview API. So the starter environment, for example, you can only get content out of the delivery APIs that is published. You can't see stuff that is work in progress or preview. Standard does include that. And the professional tier is much the same as standard, but it also comes with a full support package and SLAs around uptime and availability. So that's a bit about software as a service, but let's talk a bit about headless. Perhaps a lot of people in the room already know what that is, but we'll talk about it just in case anyone is unfamiliar. So there's sort of 2 different architectures when it comes to content management systems, and one we're going to call the traditional architecture. And this is when you have sort of your back office, so where the content authors go and modify content, and the rendering, so the place where the website is actually sort of put together and displayed in a browser, all of those in the traditional architecture, all of those components of the solution are one thing. So we've got this dotted line around it to indicate that both the back office and the head application are just one. And that comes with some problems because if you need to perhaps introduce another channel for delivering your content. So maybe you've got a website, but now you want to create a mobile app that features some of the same content as your website. Well, that can be quite difficult to do because your content management and your website are the same thing. And so now you have to kind of create an API or shoehorn something in so that you can get content out of that system and pump it to your mobile app. So that's where the headless model comes in. In a headless model, you have the back office and some kind of an API that is responsible for delivering content. And this API is there from the get-go, and it's used to serve content to potentially multiple different head applications. Now, in some situations, you might just have one, but this gives you the flexibility to expand to different channels later on. It means you can power things like websites, mobile apps, advertising kiosks, point of sale stuff, anything you like, really. So that's kind of the benefits of a headless approach. So we said Heartcore was both software as a service and headless, and we've sort of talked about what those mean. But we also said, going back to that first slide, that it's got some fairly flexible delivery APIs. And now we're going to talk a little bit more in depth around those. So in order to talk about the delivery APIs, we're going to talk a little bit about the under the hood or behind the scenes of the Heartcore platform and kind of a little bit about how it works. So Heartcore has a delivery platform in addition to the content management system. And if we go back to this headless picture for a second, the Heartcore delivery, the content delivery platform is kind of like this API layer here. It's the thing in between the content management system and the heads. So this delivery platform is comprised of a database and several different web APIs that are used to serve content. The content is pushed to the Heartcore delivery platform, so it's stored in this database whenever an item of content or media or anything is saved from the CMS. We pick up a notification and we then store the data in a read optimized format. So it's a format optimized for speed and for accessing really quickly in a delivery database. And then it becomes available through these REST and GraphQL APIs. And we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between those and why you might use one or the other in a moment. It stores both live and preview content. So if you just save something in the content management system, then it gets persisted to the delivery platform and you can query it through the preview APIs. Each of these APIs has a preview version. And then if you publish an item of content, then it becomes available in the non-preview version of these APIs. Something that's not shown in this diagram is we also have another image processing pipeline. So we also store media, so images, video, other downloads, PDF files, you know, whatever you have, whatever kind of media that your site may have. We also store that in a fashion that is quite accessible and reliable and fast to access as well. And we've also got a service that will do things like on-the-fly cropping of images and stuff like that, that is very similar to, if many of you have used, obviously, normal Umbraco, you'll know that there's we include image processing libraries in there for cropping images and stuff on the fly. All of those kind of functions are also available in Heartcore through a media API, but that's not featured on this diagram. Now, in between these APIs and your applications that you're building on top of Heartcore, we also use several different Cloudflare services, and we'll talk about what that means for you a little bit later on. But before we do that, I'd like to talk a bit about specifically these two APIs, REST and GraphQL. Now, REST has been included in Heartcore because it's an industry standard. It's used everywhere. Everyone knows how to use it. It's pretty straightforward and it's simple. It's really easy to get started with. And for a new project, you know, if you are looking to spin up something of low or medium complexity, REST is a fine option. But there are some challenges as well with it that mean that GraphQL might actually be a better option. And GraphQL, not a lot of people have experience with that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why you might want to use the GraphQL API in Heartcore. The platform also, before we move on to that, the platform also supports webhooks as well. So every time some content ends up in this delivery platform, you can optionally configure a webhook to tell some other platform about it, some other software that you control. So let's talk a little bit about that REST versus GraphQL challenge and one of the problems with REST. Now we have an endpoint on the REST API in Heartcore to get an item of content by its identifier. And the payload, when you get that back, looks something like this. You can see that's quite a lot of JSON. There's quite a lot of stuff in here. First of all, there's some metadata about the content. There's things like who created it, who was the last person to save it, where are the URLs that it lives at, when was it published or created, or any of that kind of stuff. So there's some timestamps in here. And you can also see this, we call this hypermedia metadata. So these links to other related content. So you can see like the ancestors or the children of this content item from the content tree in Umbraco. And that's a lot of different metadata. Now, for this particular content type, the only custom property that I have added in Umbraco in the back office is this one here, this example property right down the very bottom of the screen. And you can see that's a lot of extra metadata that comes with this API call. And in total, this API call results in a payload of nearly a kilobyte worth of stuff, nearly 1,000 bytes worth of stuff. So you can imagine that for a list of content items, for example, if we wanted to get all of the different pages, for example, this is a page content type, as you can see here in the JSON. If we wanted to get all of the different pages out of the CMS so that we could display just the example property, we're going to be returning a lot of data that we really just aren't interested in. And there's no way to control the REST API to only return some of this data. Now, the core CMS these days, Umbraco CMS, has a delivery API, and it has a little more fine-grained control over what the REST API returns. You can have it only return a certain subset of properties. We will probably move in that direction as well with Heartcore eventually. So we will introduce the ability to filter this API down a little bit. But until then, it's going to return quite a lot of metadata. Now, if we look at GraphQL, this is kind of the equivalent request here. I'm not going to go over the full how to use GraphQL exactly today. I'm just going to provide some examples of some really basic GraphQL queries. You can see this query, we are asking for the page with this ID. And one of the cool things about GraphQL is it's got built-in syntax to only query a certain subset of properties. So in this case, I just want to get the one example property that we saw at the bottom of the REST API response here. And GraphQL will return this response. So you can see it returns for this page that I've queried, it just returns that property. And so we get about a 93% saving in the amount of data that's returned from the API. And that means that it's fast. We don't have to transfer all of that data over the wire. We don't have to deserialize all of that data or anything like that. So GraphQL can return exactly what you ask for, and only that. You don't have to return all of the other stuff, and as a result, it ends up being a lot faster. Now, there's another challenge that comes into play a little bit with REST as well. Let's take an example component on a website, something like this one here. I'm sure you've all built things that look like this before on a website where you've got some kind of sidebar navigation. Maybe you're looking at some kind of category of pages. And so you've got a widget in the sidebar that lists the name of that category. It lists all of the pages that live in that category, and maybe it's got a link to go back to the top level. So go and view all categories rather than just the one that you're looking at now. If we kind of break that down into like content items from the Umbraco content tree, that means we're looking at the current category. So this is probably like a content item in the tree, and it's the one that's sort of currently in context on this page. We're looking at the children of that current category. And then in order to go back to all categories, we need the URL for the parent of the current category as well. So there's kind of 3 levels of hierarchy in this component. There's the current level, the children, and the parent. Now, if we were to query that via REST, we've got a couple of ways that we can do that. We can query the content type endpoint for all pages. That's a thing we could do. Or we could query for a specific content item, say by ID, or you could do it by URL. There's other endpoints as well. This is sort of just an example. And then you could query for the children or the parent of that content item. But both of these methods kind of have their flaws. With this method, you get all of the content, all of the page content items back in one flat list. And so in order to then sort of turn it into this whatever data structure you need to power that component, you've got to kind of manually turn that flat list back into a tree in your header application. So you've got to actually kind of correlate which items are the children of the current item that you're looking at. So that's a bit ugly. Alternatively, if you're making multiple requests, that's a bit ugly too. That can be really slow, especially if you have to wait for one of these requests to finish before you can fire off the next one. And so GraphQL gives us a solution for that as well. Here we have a GraphQL query that for a given content item with an ID, not only can we get the name and the URL of that content item, but in the same query, we can also get the name and the URL of the parent and for all of the children as well. And so that returns a response that looks just like this. So we can see that we're currently on the sum category page. The parent of that page is all categories, and there are 2 child pages. So GraphQL gives you the ability to query this complex tree, and it allows you to fetch related items really easily, whereas in REST, that would either be multiple API calls or you would have to manipulate the data. You'd probably have to get back way more data than you wanted, and then you'd have to do a lot of manipulation in the front end to get that data in a structure that you expect. GraphQL allows you to skip all of that. And then additionally, there's another feature of GraphQL that sort of allows you to reduce the payload size of the request as well. And we call those fragments. So fragments are basically just a small amount of GraphQL that can be reused. So here we've got a fragment, we've called it page summary, and we've said whenever we use this fragment, we would like to get the name and the URL for a content or for an item. And then our previous query, rather than specifically asking for the name and the URL of each of these things, we can use this syntax here with the 3 dots. We can say this, I would like to get the page summary for the current page. I would like to get a summary of its parent, and I would like to get a summary of all the children. So that will return the name and the URL of each of those things. And it ends up being identical to this query where we've asked for the name and the URL. Now, obviously, for a query like this, we're not actually saving much, but GraphQL queries can get much larger and more complex. And so using these fragments, you can actually make quite a substantial saving on the size of your query. And that translates to better performance because you don't, once again, you don't have to transfer as much data to the server. Your query becomes much smaller and simpler, and therefore it's faster to transfer over the wire. So that's a bit about these APIs themselves, REST and GraphQL. Now I want to talk a little bit more about another feature of Heartcore, which is the Cloudflare CDN in between these APIs and your applications or your users. So first of all, using Cloudflare any responses coming back from these applications, whenever you make a query to them, whether that comes from the user browser or whether it comes from a client application that you've created to get some content out of these APIs, all of that is cached at multiple levels. So it's cached in Cloudflare, it's cached in the API themselves. And that makes for a really performant API. Basically, whenever you have to make a request for a second time for the same content, so say you've got a website and some users hit the homepage. Well, the first user that hits the homepage, that request is going to go all the way through to the APIs. But then Cloudflare is going to cache it and the APIs are going to cache it as well. And what that means is the next user to request the homepage is going to get it virtually instantaneously. We'll talk a little bit about what these edge nodes mean in just a moment as well. Right, so these edge nodes, you can think of an edge node as a server running near you in the cloud. So Cloudflare has obviously a huge global infrastructure, and the caching that it does for any responses from these applications is cached on the edge node closest to where it was requested. So what I mean by that, let's say you have created a head application. So a website perhaps, it could be a mobile application, it could be anything really. And that application maybe has a server hosted somewhere in India. Could be in an Azure region, could be in an on-prem data center, it could be anywhere. Now, when it requests some data or some content from the delivery APIs through Cloudflare, Cloudflare is going to assign that request to the nearest edge node in India, which means it's super performant because you don't have to wait a long time for your application to hit a server that's maybe on the other side of the world. If I'm requesting that data from here in Europe, then I'm going to hit an edge node in Europe. Someone requesting that data from India will hit an edge node in India, and someone requesting that data from the United States will hit an edge node there. So it's going to return really, really quickly. Part of this delivery CDN, one of the real advantages of this is that it stays up even if the CMS doesn't. So when we have to do like patches or version changes or any kind of maintenance to the content management system, so to the Umbraco site where you edit your content, this delivery API stays up. It keeps serving content even if the CMS goes down. That's one of the benefits of that headless architecture where the API is completely decoupled from the back office itself. So if the back office needs to be taken offline for maintenance, or because you're doing a giant data import, or because you're changing, for example, the plan tier, maybe you've decided that starter is no longer good enough and you need to move to a standard. Normally that would result in a small amount of downtime for your website, but in this case, it's not going to because the delivery API has its own copy of the content and it will just keep serving it, even if the CMS back office is unavailable briefly. And we've talked about the caching. So this delivery CDN is very fast. It caches both here at Cloudflare level. And then if Cloudflare decides that it doesn't want that query in its cache anymore for whatever reason, then we've still got another layer of cache to fall back on as well. So this delivery CDN is very, very fast and very performant. This last point, these are some big words. We proactively invalidate the cache. Now, what that means is if your content changes, you don't have to wait for the cache to be updated. So typically, when you save something in the content management system, then we will push a notification to Cloudflare and to the APIs to say, okay, this item has changed. So get rid of whatever you were caching previously and cache a new value instead. And we do that instead of, for example, just setting a time on the cache and waiting for it to expire. So it means that whenever you make updates, those are available just about instantaneous. Sometimes there's a second or two delay, but it's usually pretty quick. So that's kind of a bit about the Heartcore delivery platform and how it can kind of make your lives a little bit easier by sort of being a bit more performant and what it can offer you over the CMS delivery API. So if you were to use, so a lot of people these days ask, well, the content management system has a delivery API on it now, so why would I use Heartcore? And some of this stuff is the answer to that, because Heartcore has this global CDN. Content is served from nodes very close to you, which means it's faster. If the CMS back office is down, the delivery APIs keep working, and there's a few other advantages like that. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about what Heartcore is now and maybe why you would use it as it stands now. But I also want to talk a little bit about some things that we're looking to do in the future with the platform. And the first one is just a feature, and we call this feature GraphQL persisted queries. Now, if anyone's used Heartcore before, you may have had a play around in the back office. We provide what we call a GraphQL playground. And it looks a little bit like this screenshot that you can see on the screen. But this screenshot is actually a sneak peek of sort of the next version of the GraphQL playground. So you can see in here, this functionality allows you to create your GraphQL queries from the CMS back office. And using these persisted queries, you can kind of manage and save all of your GraphQL queries in the CMS, just like a content item in advance. You don't have to do that. You can also just use GraphQL in the normal way, which is that you send GraphQL a blob of whatever your query is at the time that you want it. This is a way of saving those queries in advance. And then you can call them from the GraphQL just by specifying the alias. So instead of sending all of this query text, I would just send to GraphQL, I just want to run the query called my query. And GraphQL will just run that and it will send the results back. So all you need to provide to GraphQL is this alias. And that, again, helps with performance. Because GraphQL queries can get quite large, sometimes they get to hundreds or even thousands of lines long. By just sending the alias, we can make them more performant. 1 second. Just getting a bit of a dry throat there. So these persisted queries are a way to make your GraphQL queries even more performant. And additionally, you'll now be able to disable non-persisted queries. And what that means is one of the concerns that some customers have around GraphQL is that all of this content is there and anyone with access to GraphQL can just call it and get whatever content they want. But if we disable non-persisted queries and you only allow these persisted queries, then it means you've got very fine-grained control over what content customers can get out, because GraphQL will only ever return the properties that you specify in the query. So you get some really fine-grained access control over your content with this feature. And lastly, this editing experience, if anyone has used the GraphQL playground prior, it's a little bit old, it's a little bit dated. This new editing experience comes with things like IntelliSense. So you can see here we've got an autocomplete on the children property that I've started filling out. It's got kind of some formatting helpers So it lets you format your GraphQL nicely and pretty print it. It's got some better syntax highlighting, and it's got documentation that also includes like an auto-generated list of all of the properties on your document types. So actually, things like this children property and stuff like that, if I was to create a property on one of my document types, then I'll start getting autocomplete for that property as well. So that's a view of persisted queries. That's something that we have coming to live environments quite soon, sometime within probably the next month or two. The next thing that I want to talk about is probably a little bit more future facing than that. So this is something that we're starting to think about as a possible future for Heartcore. And that thing is called orchestration. Now, this term is a bit new out there in industry, and some people are using a slightly different term to mean the same thing. But I imagine a lot of you have worked with one of these situations where you actually need to get data out of or content out of multiple different systems in order to build your website or your application. So sometimes it might be that you need to get some content out of Umbraco CMS, but maybe there's also a DAM, like a digital asset management system, or maybe a PIM, a product inventory management system. In behind the scenes. So maybe you need to get product information from a different system, but all of your like page data and other content comes from Umbraco CMS. And there's kind of conceptually a few different ways that you can go about that. I've highlighted two of probably the most common patterns here. One is this application as a proxy, where you select one of those applications, and it usually ends up being Umbraco as the CMS. To pull in data from other applications. So you create some kind of integration between Umbraco CMS down here and the product management system in behind the scenes. And then you feed that data from the product management system through Umbraco to the user on the website. Or sometimes you might set up a proxy or a BFF, backend for front end, if anyone's unfamiliar with that acronym. So you might have this BFF sitting here and it pulls in data from both Umbraco and from the PIM, and then it joins it in some way and sends it to the user. But there's one thing that these two approaches have in common. It's when you start adding more systems to the mix, it starts to look like this. And this is a really common pattern. We see this all the time in businesses everywhere. Where you need to start getting data out of more systems to show it to the user on the front end of an application. And then sometimes you'll even have these other connections between these different systems that aren't, this system here, for example, doesn't necessarily show any content on the website, but maybe it's needed. Maybe you need to get some data into this system for some other reason. And so there's this integration created here. And all of these things usually end up really chaotic, where you've got different bits of different systems talking to one another in all sorts of unusual ways. Some of them with an API, maybe some of them are using a service bus. Maybe some of them you're still using like flat files or data exports or whatever every night. This kind of stuff happens. So what the sort of ideal solution, if you have the luxury of planning all of this out in advance, the ideal solution usually looks something a bit more like this, where you've got what we call an orchestration layer in between all of those applications and whatever it is you're building. So that orchestration layer is responsible for taking in data from multiple systems and then making it available in a nice way to your website or to your mobile application or to whatever you're building. And that orchestration system, we think there's a lot of advantage in having that orchestration system also be a nice scalable delivery platform. So that these web applications can scale to sort of an infinitely large size, and this platform just kind of continues to handle all the traffic. So that you don't have to worry about the global location of this website. You don't necessarily have to co-locate it. It would also be nice if this delivery platform kind of had that global capacity to operate as a global CDN. And as it turned out, when we were thinking about this problem, well, we've actually already got one of those. It's the Heartcore delivery platform. And so one of the directions that we're looking at taking Heartcore in is starting to allow content from more than just the CMS. So it will continue in its current capacity as being the delivery platform for all of the content coming from the Umbraco instance that you get when you create a new Heartcore project. But additionally, we're thinking that we're going to start opening up this platform a little bit more so that you can put any content in it. And then using the GraphQL API, you'll be able to join that content to one another. So if you've got data in a product, like in a PIM system, and you've got some content in a CMS, then, well, we already handle the CMS integration for you. We're already putting that content into the delivery platform. So now if we expose the API to put data into the Heartcore delivery platform, then you can quite easily put your PIM content into this platform. And now it's immediately got those benefits of global availability and scalability, and it's all kind of load balanced and cached, and you don't have to create any of that for yourself. You don't have to do the caching, you don't have to do the load balancing, because we've already done it for you. And then you can link that data that's coming from that PIM with the content that's coming from your CMS using, for example, the GraphQL API. So this is one of the things that we sort of see as being a potential future for the Heartcore platform. And if any of you saw Philip's talk at Code Garden, I don't know if any of you traveled or perhaps just saw the keynote online. But you'll know that orchestration is kind of one of those pillars that we're looking to focus more on in the future. So keep an eye on this space. This is all very sort of speculative at this point. We are looking in this direction. We don't know exactly where we're going to end up, but this is kind of the high level thinking that we've done so far. So to kind of wrap all that up, going back to an earlier slide, I actually don't have a copy of it here without going all the way back through the presentation, so I'm not going to put it on the screen just at the moment, but Heartcore is a software as a service, headless content management system. It's got flexible APIs, it's very scalable, and it's got a global content delivery network in front of it. And look, if anyone wants to try using Heartcore, there is a free trial available, so just get in touch with us. I'll hand out a copy of these slides afterwards. My email address is on there. You can feel free to hit me up with any questions that you might have. But I think we've also got some time now left in the meetup if anyone has any questions for me here and now.
Yes, thank you, Jordan. You explained it very well. It's just not a headless system, it's a platform, actually. Yes, I still remember the Philips keynote where I was over there in the 2024 Code Garden. Yes, but the orchestration is the nice concept and it's been picked up by the Umbraco. So yes, we are also looking forward for that. But yes, we do have some questions from the teams. It's a good to go. Anyone from our team wants?
Cool. Yeah, if anyone has anything that they want to know about Heartcore, it could be something I've talked about just now, or it could be anything else. Fire away. Got some hands going up.
We have two hands, yeah. Abhay, yeah.
Hello. First of all, thank you for a session, wonderful session. I had one question regarding you're saying we are using like Cloudflare environment in between working with the Heartcore. So is
Yep.
it like the every request is getting routed via Cloudflare first, and then like it is going to the Heartcore server?
Yeah,
Uh,
that. Yep.
okay. So is it acts like a proxy server or just caching thing or?
It's like a proxy. So we use some other features of Cloudflare as well, but it's effectively a proxy. So it will proxy your traffic to the hardcore apps, but in doing so, it will also cache the responses that the apps return or that the APIs return. And there's also a few other things that we rely on it for that are a little bit more under the hood and not as relevant to you. So for example, we use it to help route some traffic to the right places and stuff like that as well. So one of the things I didn't talk about is there's also a management API in Heartcore. But that management API is actually based on the CMS back office. And so one of the other little things that the Cloudflare interface does for us is it lets us use the same URL but make sure that we're sending that management API traffic to the right person's back office. So there's a few things that it does for us, but largely it's a proxy. It's the cache. So any content that's returned is cached on the edge node itself. So it's yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for clarification. Yeah.
No worries.
Yes,
We've
Asha,
got
over to you.
Hey, Jordan. First of all, thank you so much for this excellent session today. It was incredibly helpful. I
good to
also
hear.
would like to, yeah, I will also would like to know about caching mechanism we applied. Like as a developer, I'm curious to know which type of the caching mechanism we applied at Umbraco level. I know like Cloudflare has its own caching mechanism, but I would like to know about the Umbraco, how it's being applied. If you would like to share more information on that.
Yeah, it's something that's probably a little bit outside of my area of expertise, but I can offer some comments on it. So, Umbraco CMS has a built-in what we call a published content cache, and so whenever you publish any content in the CMS, then it gets added to this published cache. Sometimes we call it the new cache, and that's used to sort of serve a delivery optimized version of the content from Umbraco. So that's kind of the cache that gets used when you're calling, for example, the delivery API on the CMS. If you're just using plain Umbraco, that is. Caching options, look, they're going to be very diverse because it really depends on like your hosting. It depends on all sorts of things. So we've seen customers use things like Redis before. We've seen people use like Azure Front Door, other custom appliances as well. So there's so many options out there. Out of the box, Umbraco CMS because this is sort of more of a concern for like your infrastructure. It's not so much an application level concern. Like Umbraco does have its application level caching, but it's not really designed to be like the be all and end all. Caching is a bit more of a concern for your infrastructure. So usually you would have your own proxy or cache set up in front of Umbraco, and often that's Redis. Sometimes it's other things. It really just depends a bit on your use case. So it's not something usually that the CMS does. It's something that you yourself would set up in your infrastructure. But if you don't know how to do any of that, then hey, Heartcore is a great fit because we do it for you.
Thank you so much for answering it. I think it's a quite similar like what the on-premises Umbraco is doing, like a disk
Yeah.
cache. That's something I'm understanding at
Yeah.
this moment. Okay,
Cool.
thank you so much for answering it. I have one more question, if possible,
Yeah, go
if you
ahead.
can answer. Previously, we had a session about Umbraco Cloud with Anthony He also explained very good about the Umbraco Cloud. And since Umbraco V12 is providing delivery API, I know that you already explained how Heartcore is a different. It's a performance effective and everything. As you both are here, I can see Anthony has also joined this session. So, what you both recommend, and what is the best, if you would like to discuss on that?
Yeah, it's
Tony and Jordan. It's a together answer for you.
I can take that first, and Tony can back me up if there's anything that I missed.
Yep.
I don't think there is a clear best. The answer is very much it depends on what you're looking for. So if you don't mind, if you've got, let's say you've just had some front end development capacity available in your organization, well, then you probably don't want to use Umbraco Cloud because then you're going to have some kind of back-end development involved in setting up some of that functionality. Whereas Heartcore sort of lends itself to you can create something with just with a slightly different blend of resource available to you. So maybe you know, if you just need a basic front-end website, then Heartcore is really quick and easy to get started with. You don't have to worry about builds or you know, setting up CI/CD or source control or any of that. So if you don't need custom code, especially in the back end, and you only need to build your head application on top of the APIs, then Heartcore is a great fit. If you need custom code, especially, so maybe you want to customize some aspects of the back office. If you'd like to add some, I don't know if you're familiar with like content apps, for example, in the old V13. I'm sure they've got a new name in the V14 back office because everything does. I want to put the disclaimer out there that I'm not super familiar with the V14 back office yet. But if you were making any changes so that your content authors could do things in a different way in the back office, then Heartcore is not quite the right fit because it's software as a service. So you can't customize those aspects of it. So if you were looking to do that, then cloud's the better choice. And then it depends a little bit on your appetite for maintenance as well. So with Umbraco Cloud, we will do auto upgrades only for minor versions where there's non-breaking changes. But in December this year, for example, Umbraco 15 is going to come out. And if you're on Umbraco Cloud, then you're going to need to, if you want to be on Umbraco 15, then you have to upgrade your website from 14 to 15. On Heartcore, we're currently just staying on the latest LTS versions of Umbraco. So we're staying on 13 for a little while until eventually 17 comes out. That's the next LTS version. But we will do that upgrade for you. So you don't have to. So you will just automatically get all of the benefits of V17 when it eventually arrives, and you don't have to do the work to do that. So it's a kind of, it depends. If you've got a development team on hand who are going to be able to do those upgrades for you, then Heartcore is not quite as important. But if you don't have development capacity, or maybe you're just assembling a team to do the initial project, and then you're going to reduce the capacity and just hand it over to a BAU team for maintenance, then maybe Heartcore is a better choice because you know we do those upgrades for you, and the overall maintenance is going to be less. So there's really good cases for either choosing cloud or Heartcore. It's not necessarily a clear cut. One is better than the other. Sorry, that's a little complicated answer.
Thank you so much for it. It's really helpful.
No worries.
I can add to that, John.
Yeah,
So,
go right
Anthony.
ahead. Yeah, I think everything Jordan said. One more advantage, I would say, of choosing Heartcore over Umbraco Cloud. I've recently had a dialogue with a customer who wanted cross-region load balancing. So they wanted to get their content served from the closest region from where the end client is. So if it's a mobile app in the US versus a mobile app in Australia, you don't want it being served off a specific region only. You want it to get the content from the closest region. And I think that's a perfect, good use case for where Heartcore shines with very little effort. You could do the same with Umbraco Cloud, like I explained, where you have your subscribers set up in different regions, but it's a lot more complex to set up and maintain yourself. So I think you get that out of the box with Heartcore.
Definitely. And of course, some of the other stuff that we talked about, like if you want to use GraphQL, well, the core CMS, if you want to use GraphQL, then you've got to try and use a community plugin, because I don't even know if that works anymore. I know there used to be a GraphQL community plugin, but I don't know whether it's been updated for v14. So your answer is, at best, you can try use a community plugin, but it may just not work anymore. Whereas with Heartcore, GraphQL is sort of the first class citizen. So it's just in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, it's just a better way of querying for content from that content API, especially because the Umbraco content tree is a tree. It's REST is absolutely great for retrieving lists of items, but it falls over a little bit when you need to query a tree data structure, because it's just not very good at representing those relationships between parent and child nodes. But GraphQL is absolutely great for that. So it takes a bit of learning. There is a bit of investment in figuring out how GraphQL works. It is a little bit more complicated than REST, but it's got some great payoffs if you have developers who know how to use it. And so that's another just key benefit for Heartcore. If you want to use GraphQL, well, then there's a pretty clear choice. Try Heartcore.
And in terms of the load balancing, like how the Heartcore is handling for that?
Yep. So at the moment, we're exploring other options. Like we're always, every time we get new customers on board, they challenge us just a little further with the load. But what happens at the moment is, obviously we've got Cloudflare in there that is doing caching. The reason we added application level caching as well is because of, we had a very large customer come on board and suddenly start hitting us with a lot of requests, and I mean a lot. And what we found was that Cloudflare would let many copies of the same request through because it hadn't returned yet and been cached. So we'd get 1,000 requests for the same thing all at once, and Cloudflare would go, well, I don't have that in my cache yet. And so it would forward all 1,000 of those to the web application. And suddenly the web application now kind of falls over because it just gets hit with a lot of traffic all at once. And if it was given a chance, then it could run the first one of those, cache the result, and then go to Cloudflare. Well, all of these other 999 requests you sent through, those are actually the same. So here's the result for those as well. And then any subsequent traffic that arrived after that, Cloudflare could cache. So that's why we've kind of got this multiple layers of caching, is because it turns out there's these conditions that happen where you actually get hit with load, and one level of caching isn't enough. And you need to tell the web application, okay, try and detect when you've got the same query come in. So if you've got 1,000 copies of the same query come in, you can kind of detect that in advance, and you can go, okay, I'm only going to send one of these to the database, get the results, and now I'll return the result for all 1,000 of them. And obviously that only works if the queries are identical. If they're different, you have to let them through. So there's some application level stuff that we're doing in the APIs, but also we've got auto scaling on. So the API will automatically spin up a number of instances to account for the traffic. And when it gets over a certain threshold, when the resources start being consumed to a certain degree, then it'll create another instance. And that pretty well handles most of the load at the moment. We've got a few more plans for when we need to go to kind of the next level again. We're a little way away from that yet, but at some point we expect we'll start getting even more traffic, and we'll need to account for that. And maybe auto scaling still remains the solution there, and we just crank the maximum number of instances up even higher. But we've got some other sort of vague plans, just not quite ready to talk about those yet.
I understand. Yep. Yeah, we have one more from Asha. Yes.
It may be very easy. Can we extend the back office in Hardcore? Like if I want to add some custom section or something, can we do that using Hardcore?
Unfortunately, not at the moment. We do have a plan to eventually introduce custom property editors, but it'll only be property editors. It won't be like new sections or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
That said, one of the things that you can do with Heartcore is there is a management API. So one of the things that you can do is you can create your own. What we see some customers do is they'll have their own management application of some description. It's not something for everyone. I'm not saying this is something you necessarily do want to do, but it's an option. Where you can create your own single page app or your own web application for managing parts of content outside of the Umbraco back office, but then using the management API to push them into the CMS. So that's an option.
Nice. I think all questions are covered.
I got one more question. Sorry, it can be last.
Yeah, sure.
How Hardcore is handling the backup? What is the backup process? You are on mute, Jordan.
So I am, thank you. We have a few different things that we do. The main thing is we've got point in time restore capability on all of the Azure databases. So there's actually in the Hardcore world, there's two databases, right? There's the one for your content management system, and then there's the one in the delivery platform. And the delivery platform one is kind of is read only, and we can actually regenerate it from the CMS database. So it's actually it doesn't really need backing up, but the CMS database is the source of truth. It's where the content is authored, it's where the content lives, and that one's really important. So we've got point in time restore, and that's valid for up to a month. So through just basic Azure functionality, we can restore that database to any point in time within the last month. We've also got some kind of I'm not 100% sure because this is not my area of expertise again, but I believe that there's sort of a snapshot being taken every so often as well and backed up to like blob storage or something to that effect. So that there's in addition to just the point in time restore being able to keep 30 days worth of data at any given time, there's also like a weekly or a maybe more frequently than that. It might even be nightly. I'm not certain. But there's a nightly or a weekly snapshot happening as well that you can restore to in the event that the point in time restore isn't enough.
Yep. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you so much, Jordan. I guess it's a very nice explanation about the headless and especially Umbraco Heartcore. So I think by this way, the audience, like the developer, gets to know in which situation they can use with the Heartcore and in which situation they can utilize the cloud. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun to come here and talk about Heartcore with you all.
Yes, of course. And it's of course our favorite area because I especially used Heartcore a couple of years ago, I guess, and I'm still on it. But yeah, see you soon at Code Garden 2025, I guess. Bye, Jordan.
Thank you all. See ya.
Thank you. Bye.